Hi everyone and welcome to this video. I'm Nikhil Lool, an experienced hiker and mountaineer. In today's video, I want to guide you through the similarities and differences between the Everest Base Camp trek and a summit attempt on Kilimanjaro. I know that for many aspiring adventurers, these two are the main options for their first big adventure. So let's start with the similarities. In terms of skills, both the Everest Base Camp trek and Kilimanjaro are non-technical, so you really need no mountaineering skills at all. In terms of physical effort, they are quite on a similar level. Preparing for either of these two adventures requires similar training and similar fitness levels. But now, let's jump into the differences. The Everest Base Camp trek is basically a high-altitude trekking expedition. It takes between 12 to 14 days from Kathmandu into the mountains and back to Kathmandu. Add on top some days to travel to Kathmandu and back from your country of origin. Each day on the expedition consists of between 5 to 7 hours of hiking. The first 7 days going up towards Everest Base Camp and the last 5 days coming down from base camp. The scenery that you'll experience includes villages, rivers, monasteries, glaciers, and many others. Basically, you really feel that you are in the mountains because you are constantly surrounded by mountains. You will be sleeping and dining in tea houses or lodges. These are very basic and they get even more Spartan the higher up you go on the mountain, but they tend to be more comfortable than a tent. It is up to you whether you hire a guide and a porter, so this affects also the level of freedom and the cost, but I would strongly suggest that you do get a guide. A guide is your best insurance in case something goes wrong. In terms of the acclimatization profile, it is very gradual. You go up quite slowly and the hike itself includes some acclimatization days where you stop and rest, specifically at Nanche and at Dingboche. The hike also follows the famous motto of hike high and sleep low, where during the day you hike at a higher elevation than the elevation at which you will be sleeping. This really decreases the likelihood that you get altitude sickness. In fact, the chances of getting altitude sickness on an Everest Base Camp trek are low to medium. What is the maximum elevation that you will achieve? Base Camp, Everest Base Camp stands at 5,365 meters. So that would be the highest elevation. But typically on these Everest Base Camp tours, you also summit Kalapatar, which is a small mountain that stands near Base Camp. And here you would reach the maximum height of 5,555 meters. The success rate of an Everest Base Camp expedition is very high. What could you do after the expedition? There are a few extras that you can decide to do after having flown back to Kathmandu, and your best bet would be to fly to Pokhara, which is a very touristic destination. You could also take the bus, but flying is quite more convenient. And there you can do things like whitewater rafting, downhill mountain biking, paragliding, and so on. So there are quite a few things you can do after your expedition. The cost of the expedition, without any of these extras, so from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp and back to Kathmandu, ranges in between 1,000 euro to 2,500 euro, depending on whether you opt to have a porter and on the level of luxury that you want during your trek. On the other hand, a Kilimanjaro expedition is a high-altitude mountaineering ascent. So it's not just hiking, you are ascending a mountain. The duration depends a lot on the route that you choose, but if this is one of your first big adventures, you're probably opting for the longer routes, so you will be there between 7 to 9 days. Each day you'll be walking between 4 and 6 hours, which I would say typically is a bit easier than a day on the Everest Base Camp trek. However, on Kilimanjaro you have the summit push, which starts at around 11 or midnight and lasts anywhere between 10 and 15 hours. And this is considerably harder than any of the days on the Everest Base Camp trek. The landscape It has no villages, so basically you're constantly on the mountain and you don't get to see any rivers or any other mountains except for Mount Meru in the distance, which is really beautiful. But you go through the different climates of the mountain, starting from the rainforest and eventually ending up at the Arctic environment on summit day. On one of the routes there are some tea houses, but this is one of the shorter routes, so you're unlikely to be opting for that, which means that you will be sleeping and dining in tents, and this makes it a bit less comfortable than the Everest Base Camp trek. It is mandatory to have guides here, so you cannot go on your own. You need to go with an outfitter company, which means that you also have porters and you will only need to carry your own necessities for the day. The acclimatization profile is compressed. What we mean here is that you gain a lot of elevation in a rather short time. And because you're constantly going up a mountain, there is little opportunity to hike high and sleep low, which means that the risk of altitude sickness here is from medium to high. The highest point that you will reach, of course, is the summit, Uhuru Peak, which stands at 5,895 meters. The success rate varies depending on the route. The longer the route, the higher the success rate, with a typical success rate of 85%. What else could you do after your Kilimanjaro expedition? You can go for an amazing safari in Serengeti and in Ngorongoro. And this is truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And you could also fly to Zanzibar, which is really close by, and enjoy a few days by the beach and enjoying the African culture. How much does it cost, excluding these extras? It ranges from around 2,000 euro to 5,000 euro. And the range is so big because the luxury level changes a lot. I would say there is no need to opt for top-level luxury. Try to find a local company that has reputable reviews and go for it. And now, as a conclusion, are Everest Base Camp trek and Kilimanjaro the only two options as your first big adventure? No, they are not. Consider also these. If you want to keep it more on the trekking side, then maybe you could go for the Annapurna circuit or the Annapurna Base Camp trek, with the second being a bit shorter in terms of duration. If you want it a bit more mountaineering oriented, you could go to the Alps and climb one or a few of the 4,000s that they have there, something like Gran Paradiso or Monte Rosa. These are not too hard, but here you will require a bit of mountaineering skills, which would be useful if you want to really go into mountaineering. And also don't forget Mount Tupkal. If you want to keep your adventure on a smaller scale, Mount Tupkal is also a very good option. But whichever of these options you choose, keep in mind that your first big adventure shouldn't be massive. It should just push you a little bit out of your comfort zone and give you a taste of what will come in the future. And whatever you choose, make sure you enjoy it, not just being there, but the journey from the start, from preparation up to the end. See you on the next one.